Media like books, TV, and music are just so vast and varied, and to no one's surprise, video games are as well. Not only are there a whole bunch of different genres, with different types of gameplay, presented and shown in many different ways, they often elicit a myriad of varied responses to many dissimilar sets of people who play them. There are a lot of people that can agree with many things in the industry, such as how good games are like The Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, Resident Evil 4, Final Fantasy VII, and so on. But there are also a select set of people who often disagree with these common views, and that is where the so-called hot take comes from. I do appreciate people having the courage to share a number of hot takes that they have, although it comes to a point where people just like to be edgelords, constantly bringing negative opinions to commonly liked things, again, just to be contrarian. What does it say about a person to constantly yuck on a lot of other people's yum? I will fully admit that I have shared my own set of hot takes here on my channel, such as me not sharing the same amount of love for fan-favorite games like Elden Ring and Nier Automata. But I do often proceed or follow up my opinion with the statement that just because I don't like something doesn't diminish yours or other people's opinions. And that is always something to keep in mind when viewing YouTube content such as this. So instead of going down a commonly traveled road of sharing negative hot takes, I'd like to instead share some positive ones that I have. It's definitely possible that they're not as controversial as maybe I think, but to me, though, they're definitely viewpoints of mine that don't align with a lot of people, and or most people that I've seen or interacted with online too. Definitely let me know what you think about all of these, as well as any positive hot takes that you might have in the comments section below. And while you're there, of course, don't forget to like or dislike the video, and subscribe as well for more content. My first positive hot take is a nod to the fantastic last 10 plus years of indie games. These games are developed by small teams of people, or sometimes even just one person, and sometimes after coding and creating for over 5 years, make absolutely amazing video games. Many of these are modeled after old school games from the NES, SNES, Sega Genesis, and the like. I would argue that many of these indie games are at the same exact level of quality and fun as these old school games, with even a few of them surpassing some of the best of said old school games. I need only mention the likes of Cave Story, Shovel Knight, The Messenger, and especially Axiom Verge to this effect. Many of the indie developers grew up playing many of these old school NES, SNES games and sought to emulate and replicate their experience with their own games. After playing these old school games to death, learning not only what they loved about them, but also what could be improved, they also grew up, got good at programming, and worked to make their own versions of these games. I need only point to someone like Toby Fox, who went from hacking Earthbound ROMs to creating Undertale, which led to one of his characters and songs he made appear in a crossover game with two other characters in the Earthbound series. I, of course, am referring to Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Indies have also led creators of beloved old series like Mega Man and Castlevania to make their own versions of these games. While not every game is a winner, like the Mega Man version of Mighty No. 9, I'd say the Bloodstained series of games have been a good Pepsi or RC Cola version of my Coca-Cola flavored Castlevania series games. But in my mind, many of these games are superior versions of their inspiration, or take the best of many games to create something absolutely fantastic. Axiom Verge is an absolute work of art, trumping the original NES Metroid in every way. And if I included it in a Metroid top 10 of mine, it'd be third, below Super Metroid and Metroid Prime. And while we're talking about old school games, I'll share an oft-repeated opinion I've given on my channel regarding one of my favorites. My hot take here is that Legend of Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link, is a good game. This was something I mentioned a few weeks ago during one of our Inferno Cast podcasts that we have, of which you can catch here on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Amazon Music. Getting back to Zelda 2, this game was awesome because it changed the overall gameplay loop from the first entry to something akin to an amalgamation of an action platformer and RPG. While Zelda 1 had an overhead view and encouraged open exploration for secrets, Zelda 2 had a side view and, well, it had secrets, but it felt a lot more linear. There also wasn't much post-game content compared to the first entry, since Zelda 2 just restarted the same exact game with the same levels and layout, but with all of the levels earned and magic learned saved for the player to begin again. And man, Zelda 2 was hard. Some of the platforming could be unforgiving, bosses and enemies difficult, layouts of dungeons somewhat confusing, especially with one or two with invisible walls you have to walk through, and some of the forward progression on that note being kind of obtuse. But this is an example of an NES hard game, and one that gets significantly easier with further replays. The swordplay feels decent, combat itself is satisfying, and with some help of a guide, finding the next steps isn't so bad. And to this last point, my brothers and I had a Nintendo Power subscription, and I could have sworn it also had a guide in one of the issues as to where to find everything we needed for said progression. This is probably one of my all-time favorite NES games, due to the fun gameplay, though admittedly, nostalgia puts that really high on my list. It wouldn't rank so high in a list of Zelda games I think are the best. See my top 10 Zelda games for that. But it's not a bad game by any sense of the word. And games like it on the NES would be like Faxanadu, Rambo, surprisingly, and Battle for Olympus. Another hot take from an veteran video gamer would be that Mario Kart Super Circuit for the Game Boy Advance is a good game. This entry is often at the bottom of many a gamer's list of Mario Kart series, but not for me, and that's because this game feels like a streamlined version of the first entry that appeared on the SNES. Heck, it even has all of that game's from this first entry's tracks that are unlockable within it, and it makes it the first time a Mario Kart game actually had tracks from previous entries. The physics of the first entry, and by extension Super Circuit as well, do take some getting used to, but it works so well while conveying a great sense of speed. I also feel the rubber banding wasn't as bad as the SNES and Nintendo 64 entries. CPUs still get lightning bolts and blue shells, though thankfully not near as much as later entries in the series. And this game predates the inclusion of the blooper item, which was added for the Nintendo DS game that was released 4 years later. So again, Mario Kart Circuit is a good game, but that would be because I loved the original entry, which Super Circuit takes a lot of inspiration from. I mentioned this upcoming hot take in a video where I went through the top 10 Nintendo 64 games, so this won't be a surprise if you've subscribed and or checked that video out. But I believe the best first-person shooter on the Nintendo 64 is Doom 64. Saying this, keep in mind that I mean to take nothing away from any other first-person shooter that was on the 64. Games that had robust multiplayers and had great first-player campaigns at the time, like GoldenEye 007 and Perfect Dark, are phenomenal. But when it comes to core, gameplay, and overall feel, Doom 64 is near perfection. I erroneously believed and may have stated that Doom 64 ran at 60 frames per second. It doesn't, but it does run at a buttery smooth 30, which is a great feat for the time and this console. One big reason why I managed to keep this frame rate is its simplicity of the maps, which is inherent due to the overall Doom gameplay, as well as the sprite-based enemies and items. And while polygons of this, the 5th generation, from games like GoldenEye 007 and Perfect Dark, haven't really aged so gracefully, Doom 64's sprite-based looks, well, they really have. Doom 64's biggest missteps are that it's really dark, not obvious like horror-based, but just dark like brightness level. You gotta crank that brightness setting way up. There also is no multiplayer, and the music isn't nearly as good as its rocking PC versions of Doom 1 and Doom 2, respectively. GoldenEye in particular has Doom 64 beat on these, but the latter beats it for everything else, and quite handily too. And while we're talking about video game music here. My next hot take is that a video game's soundtrack can often be the difference between a good and a great game, or even a mid or a good game. Yeah, I absolutely acknowledge that music is just one component that a video game can be judged upon, especially when there are others such as performance, gameplay loop, graphics, and more, and so on. But there's something so inherently immersive to a video game having a fantastic soundtrack. Examples of this include the urgency that's felt when infiltrating a palace with Joker and others, while Life Will Change plays in the background, or the sense of pride felt when Cecil finally became a paladin, or even the determination felt when Clive has to fight a boss and the musical score itself rears up with On the Shoulder of Giants. Another side of the coin for this would be the newest Metroid game, Metroid Dread. This is probably the second best 2D Metroid game ever made. The gameplay, exploration, bits of story elements, and everything else in it is darn near to perfection. But what keeps this game from being perfect is the music. Dread's music is fine, but therein lies the problem. Music from the Metroid series is known to be excellent, marrying both ambient and catchy themes to the environments that Samus explores. But Dread itself leaned way too hard into the ambient side, and I found myself not really being attracted to any of the tunes like most of the other Metroid games that I played. Another bonus hot take? I'm not a fan of video games pulling licensed music when the genre wouldn't really call for it. Now, I don't have any issues with games like Guitar Hero and Rock Band doing this because, of course, that's the point of those games. But why do we need racing games like Need for Speed, Grand Theft Auto, or even Fork Knife doing this? Okay, I know these types of games do this because they're trying to allow for them to be more mainstream as well as reflect whatever real-world environment they're trying to emulate. But something is lost when video games don't take the time to produce and feature soundtracks to engage players and enhance the environments for overall gameplay. Let's talk about the Kinect now. And you can guess where I'm going with this one. I believe the Kinect was a fun device for the Xbox 360. Yes, it was Microsoft's gimmicky release and response for the motion control fad of its time, and it was probably underutilized. But there were a lot of games that were made for it that were great. Okay. Yeah, I can't even finish the sentence with a straight face. Regardless, it was a lot of fun for me and my significant others at the time, specifically with the Dance Central series of games. These felt like learning cheerleader routines, what with specific moves that needed to be performed in mirror reflections of what was being shown on the screen. This was released in the early part of the last decade, which for me was like the last time that I enjoyed top 40 music that was coming out. So it was cool to listen to the music, dance to it, and get a lot of good exercise as well. In life and in general, I enjoy going against expectations, and this game really helped for me to do that. Now, I'm a guy with little to no discernible physical rhythm, yet I'd still be able to beat my significant other at the time and her female friends on all of the versus battles that I would be challenged on. I'm also proud of the fact that I got the highest marks possible, 5 golden stars on Lady Gaga's Just Dance song, which was on the first Dance Central game on the hardest difficulty. Today, this is still known as the 5th hardest song of the whole series. Numbers 1 through 4, I could only get 5 standard stars on. Now, for my fellow console gamers, this last one will be quite a hot take. And that is the fact that not all mobile games are hot steaming garbage. That's not to say that there isn't a lot of shovelware on mobile devices or mobile shops. There absolutely is. But the idea that it's all trash, or that people who only game through mobile devices aren't real gamers, is wrong in my opinion. While I don't currently play games on any mobile devices, I did in the past. I enjoyed the various ports of games like Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest on my iPhone, especially the latter series, which hadn't had certain numbers ported on systems since back on the Nintendo DS, and those entries cost over $100 to $200 plus. As mentioned on a previous video of mine, I also enjoyed the mobile-only game Final Fantasy Dimensions, as it takes the best of the first 5 entries in the series and came together into a stellar RPG worthy of said series. I also rather enjoyed the gacha game Final Fantasy Record Keeper, which I admittedly spent a little bit too much money on. This was a great entry though at the time, and it had like a Final Fantasy VI type battle system and sprites, but with characters from every single Final Fantasy entry and beyond. And man, I'd love to take both of these Final Fantasy games adapted onto a console in like a wallet-friendly way, but while I know it'll never happen, I can always dream. And this is just one of many reasons why I think there are some gems on mobile devices. As I also mentioned, I do believe that those who only play mobile games are gamers as well. It's possible they may be casual gamers, playing Candy Crush and or Genshin Impact or Clash Royale every so often, but they're playing a game on a device that's most convenient to them. The idea that we need to gatekeep the hobby of video games as a whole, to me, is blasphemous. We need more people in this hobby of ours, not less, because the more money being spent in video games, which younger generations are doing according to the study that's shown here, the more time investment we'll see in new and old titles alike. And hey, who doesn't like just sitting back and relaxing and getting some time with our favorite video game? Whether it's Resident Evil 4 or Angry Birds, mobile gaming can have us covered, which, funny enough, Apple is looking to cover both on their devices. I personally prefer having a controller in my hand while playing video games so that I can have that sort of tactile feedback from the buttons of said controller and joystick. And yes, I'm aware that there are devices that allow controllers to hook up to mobile devices, but I still had a lot of fun with mobile titles in the past. From video games I've enjoyed in the past to even just enjoying certain types, you can see I've had some interesting yet positive hot takes here. And maybe it's possible that these really aren't all that controversial as I thought. Let me know in the comments section below, because I'd really like to start a dialogue with you guys, as well as learn your personal hot takes. For mine, I've heard a lot of large opinion contrarian to what I've described here, so I figured it'd be fun to share them. Thanks again for watching, and have a great day.